Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Natalia Moczulska, and this is the news. Migration pressure on the Polish-Belarusian border continues unabated. In addition to border incidents, Russian mercenaries in Belarus are an additional threat. Over the next week, the infamous Wagnerians are to train the Belarusian military at the training ground in Brest, near the Polish border. For this reason, the head of the Ministry of Defense is redeploying additional troops from the west to the east. The Ministry of Defense has refused to provide information on the current manpower situation on the Polish-Belarusian border. Just 3 days ago, security along the 420-kilometer stretch was guarded by 1,300 soldiers. We anticipate the worst scenarios, and for these most negative scenarios, we have to be ready. We assume that the Wagnerians will not dare absolutely, because our border services and the troops that operate there are a very good barrier. But by the decision of Minister Mariusz Błaszczak, we have moved some of the operational troops. In June alone, some 3,000 illegal migrants tried to enter Poland through Belarus, compared to just over 630 last June. The last operational day, as far as the border with Belarus is concerned, was 196 attempts to cross the Belarusian border. We here notice this increased migratory pressure, and it should be noted that most of the time these illegal migrants are helped by the Belarusian services, and in fact, it is all the time under our supervision. Residents of a village in the Lublin voivodeship, located a few kilometers from Brest, are concerned about the presence of Wagnerians right next to the border. The training ground where they practice is located 2 kilometers from the Bug River. We can hear the helicopters flying. When they shoot, sometimes the windows shake. I am afraid. I have a son in the army. He is a military member. I'm worried about him and my grandchildren. The Wagner Group's presence in Belarus is the result of a failed putsch. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who moved on Moscow with his formation, was forced to disband the formation. Some of the mercenaries ended up in Belarus. This is sort of a classic of actions characteristic of Russia, going back to really distant times, but also referring to this concept of hybrid warfare, the concept of precisely destabilizing states through actions of a diversionary nature, which is characteristic of Gerasimov's doctrine. According to Paweł Łatuszka, a Belarusian oppositionist, the Wagnerians will be used to create threats to neighboring countries, but not Ukraine, but rather NATO members such as Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. We have information that there are 2,500, maybe 3,000 Wagner mercenaries in Belarus. They are mainly in the Mogilev region, in the Osipovice area, but recently they have had military exercises just over the border with Poland. Up to 10,000 mercenaries are expected to arrive in Belarus, according to figures made public by one of the Wagner's mercenaries. Nearly 80,000 Wagnerians took part in the invasion of Ukraine, more than half of whom were recruited in prisons. Wounded or killed were 80,000 of the mercenaries. On the Ukrainian front, the convicts developed a reputation for being undisciplined, as they refused to follow orders. To stop numerous desertion attempts, captured fugitives were punished by death. On the one hand, yes, they were subordinate to the Russian Defense Ministry, as Putin himself admitted a few days after the putsch. Some 100 billion rubles were allocated over several years to fund the group. However, if we look at this issue, strictly from the tactical side, of course all the prisoners were under the command of the so-called Wagner group. They were used rather as cannon fodder for constant assaults on Ukrainian positions. Today, Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced that 8 American Apache helicopters will soon be delivered to Poland. The United States will make them available until Poland receives 96 of the purchased machines. According to Minister Błaszczak, the helicopters will be directed to the so-called Brest Gate. After reports that the Wagner Group was deployed in Belarus, Germany also expressed readiness to support NATO's eastern flank. The Russians carried out missile attacks on Ukrainian cities overnight. An anti-aircraft alert was declared in Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Sumy, Donetsk, Cherkasy, and Kirovohrad regions. Explosions were heard in the Odessa region, and there are casualties among the civilian population. Industrial facilities and residential buildings have been destroyed. In just 4 days of the week, since Monday, Russian terrorists have already used almost 70 missiles of various types, almost 90 Shaheeds against our state, and largely against Odessa, the Odessa region, Mykolaiv, and other southern cities and communities. Of course, our soldiers managed to shoot down some of the enemy missiles and drones, and I thank each of our sky defenders for this. But unfortunately, the capacity of Ukrainian air defense is not yet enough to protect the entire Ukrainian sky. We are working with our partners ours as actively as possible to add additional air defense systems that can give peace and security to Odessa and all other cities and communities of our country. The victims of Russian strikes are being provided with the necessary assistance. Again and again, I thank the employees of our ports and transport infrastructure in general who are doing everything to preserve Ukraine's export potential and our access to the global economy. Today, we also have important decisions by the National Bank of Ukraine regarding a financial institution operating in our country and owned by Russian oligarchs. It is sanctioned under multiple jurisdictions. The National Security and Defense Council has imposed sanctions, and now it is only right that the cabinet ministers of Ukraine immediately consider the relevant proposals of the central bank and support them in relation to this financial institution in the interests of investors for the sake of financial stability and basic justice. Greece struggled to contain a wildfire west of Athens for a fifth day as another heat wave hit the country. Polish firefighters heading to Greece to help extinguish forest fires crossed into the border of Greece at noon today as they headed to the base of operations. A 63-year-old pensioner, Mikhailo's home in the village of Pernari was saved. He refused to leave it when authorities asked hundreds of residents to evacuate the area during the last 3 days. I have a little house. We tried to save it and luckily we did. We were here for 3-4 days with the fire. It was a burden, but thank God we saved it. As far as everything else, it's all charcoal. Nothing is left. It was such a beautiful place. There is no prevention, nothing. There are no anti-fire zones. When you try to cut a branch to clear the area, you get fined. A fire service official said there were concerns of rekindling after more than 100 houses and businesses have been severely damaged from the blaze, and another near Athens that authorities put out earlier in the week. The government on Friday announced relief measures for afflicted households, including financial aid and subsidies to rent houses. In 2022, Greece drastically increased spending for the fire prevention and preparedness and created a climate crisis bureau for the first time. The program included maintenance of anti-fire zones, increased patrolling, and fire readiness exercises. An EU-coordinated pre-positioning project where firefighters from EU member states are stationed on rotation inside the country throughout the summer is also in effect. Reinforcements were to arrive on Friday or were already in the field from Cyprus, France, Israel, Romania, Poland, Slovakia, and Italy in the form of firefighters or aircraft. Authorities urge people to remain on guard as the risk of wildfires in the coming days will remain high, and further high temperatures are forecast following on from a previous heat wave. Workers at a Polish shelter are taking special steps from air conditioning to water holes to help their dogs and cats cope with sweltering temperatures. While temperatures across Europe are on the rise, the increasing heat is troubling dogs in the Napaluchu shelter in Warsaw. With very high temperatures, the dogs just don't want to do anything, just like us. It is too hot. Some dogs do not want to go for a walk at all, or only move where there are shadow spots. They are lethargic and cannot run around. There is a problem with sniffing. The dog uses a lot of energy when sniffing, and in the heat it becomes problematic because our dogs can simply overheat. The shelter, which houses 650 dogs and 180 cats, has bought children sand pits and filled them with water to give the dogs a way to cool down. It has also hung up nets to provide shade and installed air conditioning. An employee of the animal shelter has a few tips on how to help out your pets in the scorching weather. Make sure your pet always has cold, clean water to drink. Replace it even several times a day when it's hot. And we can also help other animals in this way by simply putting a bowl of water in front of the house. That will help not only dogs and cats, but also birds, hedgehogs, and other animals living in the city. It will for sure help out the animals to survive the heat wave. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please stay tuned for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and some of our other programs. But for me, it's have a wonderful weekend.